Thank you for tuning in today. Welcome to the show, guys. Today we have a very exciting guest, Kathy Cheng, who is the president of WS Co., one of Canada's leading full-service apparel manufacturers. She is also the founder of WS Co. in Stock Apparel Online, as well as Redwood Classics Apparel, which provides promotional and retail distributors with trending garments that are handcrafted in America. Now, 2020 was a milestone year. Kathy was named on Inc. magazine's 100 Female Founders list for 2020 and was awarded the CAMSC Special Recognition Award for her philanthropic work and inclusive local procurement during COVID-19. She was also recognized for her significant contributions in supplier diversity, receiving the WBE President's Award and the CGLCC LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce Ambassador of the Year Award. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Winnie, for having me. It's such a pleasure. It's an honor to be here.
Excellent. That's great. That was a bit of a mouthful, Anne, but I know you have quite a bit of additional achievements over here. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background and your current role?
Okay, so my name is Kathy. I am the president of Redwood Classics Apparel. As you had mentioned, we're one of the few full-service apparel manufacturers that's proudly producing everything on Canadian soil. So we're super proud of that. I would say our story is your typical immigrant story. So it's a family business, Redwood Classics. The factory is owned and operated by WS Co., the company which specializes in producing private label for a number of retail and designer brands. Let's just say if you have a product that's made in Canada in your closet from the Olympics back in the days, that probably was something that was ours, and it's still in your closet because it's a well-made garment. So that's what I'm hoping for. So really, I mean, my dad started the factory with his brother and sister in 1988 with 5 people and 10 machines. And in fast forward to the 90s, they scaled the business where we were directly employing close to 500 people. We were probably about over close to 200,000 square feet of space, and it was all done locally. It was all done made in Canada. And in terms of scaling, was also just scaling our value chain. So we went from a sewing contractor to a cut and sew facility. Then we ended up, we had a dye house, warehouse, embroidery, screen printing, and towards, later on in the days, we ended up owning a knitting mill as well. So we were knitting fabric locally in 3 locations, all proudly in Scarborough. And then 2001, China joins WTO. Quotas get lifted, and it becomes really challenging to compete when labor costs are cents to a dollar. For Canadian
Right.
labor, it's expensive, right? It's relative to a lot of offshore makers. At that point, it was really challenging, and so I would say in 2008, by that time, we were down to about 150 people. And the reality was the business landscape could not support the infrastructure that we had scaled to. So uh, by this time my aunt and uncle had retired from the business. It was just my dad. And I always kind of joke and say 2008 was a pretty milestone year. Not only were we all going through a global financial recession, um, I just got married that year. My dad just turned 50. I was joking say he was a really bad boy when he had me because I'm not that young. He was a bad boy. Um, and I remember him like I was in the business, but I wasn't. I don't know if it was maturity or it was just I wasn't at an ownership capacity. And not to say that I would be any different, but long and short of it was, when we were going through challenges, and word got out on the factory floor that the factory may not be around anymore. And I'm very much motivated, and the story really is it's loyalty to my family, my father, It's a family business, but also loyalty to our family of makers. You know, when I've grown up in factories, we came from humble beginnings, like most immigrant families did or have, right? Coming to Canada. And at that time, I remember I was a latchkey kid at the age of 5. I grew up at factories. They couldn't afford to send me to camp. I didn't know what summer camp was. They didn't have babysitters. So I would actually go to work for summer days and March break. And we were lucky enough that some of my dad's employers would allow him to bring me. And he'd put me on props and rows of fabric, and I literally watched the production floor at whichever factories he was working at. So that's why I was joking, say like I literally grew up in factories. So when he asked me to be his business partner, and asked and said, "Hey, would you like to do this with me all over again?" Um, I selfishly, deep down, didn't really want to, because I thought, I've been in factories all my life. It's finally, my turn to do what I want to do. But Munib, I share this and I call it my aha moment, where I remember being on the production floor, machines humming, and I swear I feel like, I don't know if it was in my mind, but I thought I could feel the emotions of the idea of not being around anymore. And it just hit me like a ton of brick, and I realized, holy bleep, like I have to do this. I have to be his business partner. Many of our makers, they too are immigrants themselves. And, if you recall, in 1997, China took back Hong Kong. So there was a huge influx of immigrants coming from Hong Kong. And Hong Kong used to be a textile hub, right? So there was a lot of knowledge, there was a lot of experience that they were able to bring over. And we were able to onboard them as part of our family of makers. So I just realized, like, oh my goodness, I've experienced such an amazing life, um, because of our family of makers. So I needed to do this. And so, long and short of it, January 2009, my dad and I became business partners, and we humbly restructured with 40 people. And we just kept our head down, and all we focused on was high quality, quick to market, collaborative approach in terms of how we were doing product development and bulk production. And it was always, we just promoted made in Canada. And that's really how Redwood Classics was born as a brand. Um, I started having people calling. And at this time, I'm jack of all trades. I'm the receptionist. I answer calls. I'm doing everything and anything, because that's entrepreneurship is not sexy, right? It's not glamorous. It's not a rock star lifestyle. It's a lot of hard work and dedication. So I remember picking up the phone. I'd get calls, and at this time, our factory didn't have a brand. So people would call and say, "Hey, I looked up your CA number 19247. I bought this sweatshirt 10 years ago, washed it a million times. I just want more. Where do I get more?" And I would get a number of these calls, and finally it dinged. I was like, wait a second. And you got to remember, this is in the height of fast fashion. People didn't care where the products were coming from. They didn't care about sustainability. And it was whatever they could get the cheapest and the fastest. That's what the appetite was. And here we were restarting this business and launching this brand that was a complete opposite of what that stood for. We were about slow fashion. We were about handcraftedness.
And that's really interesting, because it feels like it's an uphill battle, and you're facing this intense competition internationally, where they're cutting prices, and you're trying to sustain your business in the current market, and basically trying to leverage your brand. That must be quite challenging at the time, and obviously with the internet now, at that stage, even e-commerce, online shopping was becoming the norm. So
Yeah.
how did you overcome that challenge?
Well, I would say we started off, we just said, okay, well, why don't we make it easy for people? Let's start a brand. And so, Redwood Classics became the premium in stock apparel brand. And the reason why we needed an in stock apparel brand, even though we specialize in private label for a number of retail and designer brands, was the fact that we needed to normalize our business. Yeah, remember, I don't have contracts. There's no guarantee of business. And the main reason why we restructured was so we could continue having a platform for our makers to have a job and to contribute back to our country. that was our purpose. That was the reason why we wanted to continue fighting this battle of made in Canada, because it was really really challenging. And I always kind of say now, I think Darwinism at its best happened. The manufacturers, especially the apparel manufacturers that were able to survive through that recession, they had a reason to exist, and I realized we had a reason to exist as well. And so part of the things that we did in growing our brand was we were somewhat early adopters, I guess you could say, in the digital media space. We I always felt like it was really important because what made our brand different, not only was it made in Canada, but I wanted a platform to be able to showcase our makers. We need to humanize business. And I just felt like, especially
Mm,
with fast fashion, if you think about it, years ago, maybe your uncle had a hand in the shirt you're wearing. Maybe your mom was a seamstress. Like there were this craft, and the textile industry was alive in North America back in the day, right? And so
mm,
I just felt like maybe through social media, we can showcase things that maybe offshore makers weren't doing. So that's why if you follow us, every Friday we do a hashtag Factory Friday. And we started that series because we wanted to do something different. We wanted to humanize the business, and that's all part of our educating. So that's what I would say with social media is we've we share, we educate. We don't use social media to say, "Hey, look at me, come buy me, come buy me." We don't use it to sell. We're using it as a tool to educate and to build a community that shares perhaps the same ethos as us, who maybe appreciates the fact that we've sustained made in Canada, and the craft and the workmanship of our product.
mm.
And
No,
really, we hope to use that platform to lend a voice for others too that may not feel like they have a voice or may not feel comfortable using their voice.
mm. I always say that, education is the best form of marketing. You're not really trying to sell. What you're trying to do is you're trying to educate your audience and helping them in making an informed decision.
Hmm.
So it really helps the customer, and I think that's really important, through the buying process and the journey that they're taking to become a customer. Um, so with regards to marketing, obviously the marketing space is very, very turbulent in today's world. I mean, you have so many different options that you can use to market your business, and every business knows that they need to be on social media, and they need to be on different platforms engaging with their audiences online. What
Hmm.
do you find has worked really well in leveraging the Redwood Classics brand?
Well, I think when we first started, I didn't really quite understand what hashtag was, but I kept going made in Canada hashtag, right? Like it was just everything and anything that we posted was hashtag made in Canada, hashtag quality, hashtag. And so we really ran with that. And we continue to. Um, but sorry, can you repeat the question? Like, what do we do with
Yeah.
social media to,
Yeah, so basically, when we're looking at marketing online, or when we're basically helping to extend our brand online and engage with audiences, what do you find has worked really well from a marketing perspective? You mentioned that social media has worked.
yes.
And what exactly in social media has worked for Redwood Classics?
I think we went from a business to business brand because when we first launched Redwood Classics, we were not a consumer brand. We were selling. We launched it in a secret industry called the promotional products industry. Have you ever heard of that? The swag. I didn't even know this industry existed. I just I don't even know. I didn't think. I didn't even realize how much of everything we touch has branding on it, right? Because
Hmm.
you think of, and I didn't think of it that way. But anyway, so I thought there was a niche in that marketplace because what I found was, you get a concert tee and maybe it's not the best quality concert tee, or I was getting free stuff, but people aren't necessarily using it because they perhaps didn't feel like it was of best quality. And I would always ask myself, like, I don't understand, why would a Fortune 500 company spend so much money on marketing and branding, but then they put it on an inferior product? Like,
Hmm.
how many t-shirts have you ever gotten for free and it ended up being a rag? Let's be honest. right?
That's
What's
right.
the ROI on that? They spend so much on branding and you give away this free t-shirt that you've probably, if you even wore it once. Whereas if you invested more on not just the branding of your brand, but also on the other side, it takes two hands to clap, right? Which is the medium. If you invested on a higher quality medium, and you know what? When it ended up being your favorite t-shirt that you had in your closet for 10 years and you've worn it a million times, your ROI are pennies. And that's what I realized in the secret industry that was missing. Like I didn't see much great quality, right? Because often things were being given away. So that's where I launched the brand. And then we use social media to really talk about, let's invest in quality as opposed to invest, like let's make better buying decisions because it's more sustainable too. Again, fast fashion was creating, and still is actually a lot of landfill issues. And we
Mm.
don't want one use products, right? We want to have a future. There's no plan B, there's no planet B. So we use social media to educate. We use social media to show behind the scenes and to humanize our business. And
Mm.
through that, I think it ended up, we started, because it's the product too. So I also believe we have great product. And so the recipients that were receiving these, corporate gifts or whatever they were, branded merchandise, we started getting calls from the end user or the employee, and they would say, "Oh, I got this sweatshirt from my company. I absolutely love it. I don't really care if it has a logo on it." And we're like, right? And I remember vividly there was this one experience where this end user was just so adamant, and they called, and I don't know how many touch points and emails went by because we'd be like, "Oh, sorry, we don't sell direct, we don't sell to you. Can you go back to your company and ask your marketing department who they worked with and who the reseller was, and then we'll find that reseller and we'll try to get you this one piece." Like, it was just so convoluted. But what was so inspiring through that story and that particular incident that I will never forget is that there's an appetite for our product. And so our Edward Chow, who's our creative director now, was like, simple solution. We're going to do a Shopify site. So then that's kind of how we became a B2C brand. And over the years, we just started, using our platform with digital media is to build the community and share what our ethos are,
Mm.
and hopefully we just build this community together. It's all about what values, we want community members that align with our values, with our brand values.
Mm. It's interesting you mentioned about kind of shifting, because originally you were primarily a B2B company. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, that is
Yeah.
correct.
And then over time, as the market was evolving, you decided to go into the B2C side of things by launching the Shopify store and having
Yeah.
these products that are available for one-time purchase as well, or single purchases. And I think that's really interesting. You've kind of transitioned and evolved your business over time, especially since its inception over 3 decades ago. How has the recent year been an impact? With COVID and with the changes that have happened with businesses. I know that a lot of businesses have had to pivot, update their business models and really transform how they actually do business, whether it's offline or online.
Hmm.
How has that impacted? How has COVID impacted Redwood Classics?
I think if I net, it's probably positive because some of the lessons that we've learned as citizens is, if you remember in the beginning of pandemic, there was a huge shortage of PPEs, and there wasn't enough masks, and there was just so much chaos. And I still remember, and this is where I plug in my diversity play too, because we're of Asian descent, and a number of our makers are of Asian descent as well. And if you remember, years back, there was SARS. So we had the experience of SARS. So we actually started quarantining um, our makers, whoever went back to Asia for the holidays. We started quarantining all the way back in December of 2019, even before everyone else was like, quarantine, this is not going to make it on this side of the pond. And oh yeah, it hit us with the vengeance, right? So at that point, we were already making premium reusable face masks for our own factory, for our local supply chain partners as well. And so when, we all of a sudden there was a shutdown, there was no supplies, and you heard the government saying, we need help with PPEs, whoever has a sewing machine, you had to go through some red tape, and that just, we were like, okay, what can we do? And we just took matters in our own hand. Even though we did shut down, we had a small um, volunteer crew of makers that came in and started making reusable premium masks. And what kickstarted the whole thing was there's a hospital, local hospital, Michael Garron Hospital, that did a challenge and said, hey, we're challenging the community if we can collect 1,000 homemade masks um, in a week. And we answered the challenge and we delivered 1,000, premium, professionally made, reusable masks in a few days. And then that just kickstarted. And this is where I'm going to bring back digital. Because what we ended up
Mhm.
doing was, thankfully we had the Shopify site and thankfully we had online presence. Because what we were able to do right away was, wait a second, there's so many communities that need these masks. And you got to remember, nobody had masks at this point. So we ended up launching this hashtag Made for Good challenge and essentially put up masks on our website. And for every set of masks that we sold, we were donating back to one of the nonprofit partners. And we have donated over $100,000 worth of premium masks across the country, including Indigenous communities, local hospitals, healthcare networks, children's services, Habitat for Humanity, Sick Kids Hospital. Like it was a wonderful journey to be able to be part of, and that's why I always go back and I'm a big proponent of Made in Canada, and I want to remember. I want to remind our listeners, please don't support your local business when it's convenient for you, because in a time of a pandemic, there was a number of Made in Canada manufacturers that stepped up to take care of our citizens. And it needs to be nurtured year round. If we never survived, let's say that, our restructuring, we wouldn't have been able to give back. So I think giving back is really important.
So true, and I think that that's true. I mean, like in terms of supporting the local business community, I know that a lot of cities are suffering, local businesses are suffering, and it's a challenge because it is so convenient right now to just go online and go to Amazon
Mm-hmm.
or go to any one of these
Mm-hmm.
stores and click a button and get your product sometimes the same day. Um, so it's really challenging, but I think that this is the kind of time period where we need to really rethink how and where our money is going and who we are supporting. So it's really interesting how you were able to, leverage this opportunity, but also give back to the community in a big way over the period of time, which I think is amazing because I think a lot of businesses need to think, not just about themselves. I think they need to really think through how they can actually help support the community during these times. And I think, once we come out of this, and we will come out of this eventually with time,
Eventually,
you
that's
know,
something great.
that's right. And I believe that these experiences are what make our business stronger. And that's you mentioned earlier a really key word is community, building that community and supporting local. I think that's really critical. And I think over time, as you are trying to build your brand and build your business, I think brand is all about the experience that you're trying to deliver,
Yes.
and all these touch points impact that experience. So I think it's extremely critical for business to think beyond their own circle and look at other businesses that you can actually help and you can and communities you can help and be part of, especially during these tough times.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
so you've gone through quite a bit of a journey over here, and I just want to kind of go into a little bit deeper about where do you see your business going in the future? Considering that there's been so many changes in the past little while,
Hmm.
what is the vision of the next 4 to 5 years?
Our vision is to really continue to focus, follow our North Star. And I was going to say our North Star is people, planet, and I know the original should be profit, but for us is prosperity, because we have
Mm-hmm.
seen the demise of the textile industry in Canada and we've had a hand in rebuilding it. That's what we've done with our business. So we went from 40 people to pre-pandemic, we almost tripled our headcount. And it was just really focusing on quality, and we're, you know, tripling the headcount also included us looking at the way we were operating our business. Earlier this year we published our Made in Canada 10-year impact report, which you can find on our website. this was actually supposed to be, it was supposed to be published last year, but because of the pandemic, we kind of got sidetracked and ended up really focusing on giving back to our country and our citizens. So that's why it got published earlier this year. But in that Made in Canada Impact Report, we actually, focus on our goals, which is showcasing we are a diverse workforce. Secondly, as Planet is minimizing carbon footprint. At this point, as part of our growth was not only were we just cutting and sewing here, we actually bring in yarn by the container. And at this point, on average, about 70% of the raw material we consume at the factory level is actually knitted within 100 miles radius of our factory. So we're really
Wow.
rebuilding a local supply chain. And in addition to that, about diversity, people is also community building, is recognizing that um, as a Made in Canada supplier, we can really help our local supply chain as well. So rebuilding the local supply chain. Approximately 68% of our local procurement spend is with a women-owned business or a minority-owned business. So we're tracking that stuff too. So all this stuff
Mm.
is important to us. And then as of late, we invested in, um, we're actually Canada's first, we actually have Canada's first sustainable fabric printing solution. And it's roll to roll
Wow.
printing and it's low minimum. The ink is 100% biodegradable. We're the only one in Canada has it. We're the first ones in Canada to have it. And it was a huge investment because we're looking at the future. So if you ask me, what does the future hold? The future it includes a very inclusive supply chain. It is a local supply chain. It is a prosperous supply chain that is going to touch on families. It's going to touch
Mm.
my family, right? It's provided my family and our family of makers economic sustainability. And so I'm going to go back
Mm.
to my story. I was a latchkey kid at the age of 5. And now my kids I went to university. I had the opportunity to go to university because of this factory and because of all the people in it.
Mm.
So in that report, we also state our SDG goals. And, it really is focusing on local supply chain. It's equality. Women's voices are really important to me. Um, I don't know if we're gonna go into it, but basically, I could share, Munib, I am not the same woman I was, in 2014, where I would say most of all of this craziness kind of started. Um, I got inducted in Ernest and Young's Winning Women program, and I remember feeling like I didn't belong. Like
Mm.
people didn't look like me. They were all women, and I didn't even know what an elevator pitch was. I
Mm.
think I work at a factory. I don't need to do pitches. I don't go fundraise. I don't do any of that stuff. And through that experience, though, that was the beginning of the journey because they also introduced me to supplier diversity. And they also provided a number of great contacts and development. And I realized, oh my goodness, I have a voice. And I have this mentor and dear friend, Phyllis Newhouse. I remember at the orientation, I just felt really out of place. And she shook me by the shoulder. She's an very successful African American entrepreneur, female entrepreneur. She's like, crazy now, but at the time, she's still Phyllis to me. But she took me by the shoulder and she said to me, "You know what? You may not feel like you belong, but you earned your place here. You have a voice." And that was just the beginning of it. And I still remember there were many instances. I'm still very uncomfortable speaking publicly. I'll do it because as yeah, I truly believe that in order to grow personally, which I guarantee you will impact your business professionally, you need to put yourself in uncomfortable situations. So that's
Mm.
what I do quite a bit.
Mm. And that's wonderful. I think that, it's only through those uncomfortable situations and through struggle that you actually are able to grow personally and professionally.
Yeah.
And, a lot of marketers who are listening to this podcast, sometimes they doubt themselves, to the point, okay, are they able to achieve the goals that they have set forth for themselves? And you've had a really interesting journey over the years, in terms of, achieving certain awards and getting yourself to a point. So I would say, what advice do you have to the marketers that are currently listening to this show?
I would say be authentic. You have to believe in what you're marketing. I'll be honest, I don't think we would be able to build this Redwood Classics brand if I didn't passionately believe in it.
Hmm.
How do you market something you don't believe in? That's like telling a lie, right? Professionally, which I don't know. I assume it can be very challenging. I don't know how to, um, have a full time job to tell a lie because you don't believe in the product or the service. So I think you have to
Hmm.
passionately believe in it, be authentic in the way that you're approaching it, but you can still be very thoughtful through data analytics and all those other things, right? But I
Hmm.
also believe you need to be confident. I think part of it, the self confidence, is the key in being successful in life. Embrace what makes you unique and what makes the product unique and different, and appreciate that what you can bring, what your product can solve. What is the solution that you're able to bring? Because that's what makes you unique. And
Hmm.
that, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't
So,
know how to.
it's interesting you mentioned that because the thing is that traditional marketers would always say that, okay, marketing is all about perception. And yes, somewhat that is true, but sometimes there's a lot of BS, in that too, where, you're
Yeah.
trying to pose something that is not really the case and you're trying to trick, consumers into buying something just for the short term. But, you've been in the game long term for more than 3 decades, and you know that you have this sustainable brand that has a strong vision to grow and overcome the market. So I think that mindset I think has really helped you in terms of keeping everything authentic, and even in your
Hmm.
communication on your channels online. It's been really interesting to go through some of the content that you have posted, because they really tell a story about your background, your company, and it's very personable. So
A
I
little
found
bit
that's
something. I was like,
yeah.
oh, it's 2%. But I that's part of it, right? Like, I
Hmm.
found my voice, and I feel like it's my responsibility and our responsibility as a brand to lead the way. If not lead the way, then, clear the path for others' voices to be heard. That's something that I think is so important, because you don't know what you don't know. But once you do know, I think you need to do something about it. It's just, and I've been inspired by a number of other women who have helped me along the way, men and women. It's about opportunities, and they've opened doors, and they've supported me, and they believed in me. So I think it's important that we do the same for others, and we try to uplift others, because there's just too much negativity in this world. So I think overall we try to be more positive. And that's why even the content that we share is this is what we're doing. What are others doing? How do we highlight others? Like, another series that I'm really, really proud of that we launched, for Women's Week, I mean, sorry, for International Women's Day, this March, was our Women of the Week. So, any
Hmm.
listeners, by all means, submit. If there's a woman out there that you want to hear her voice and you think she has something to say, nominate her. And we're featuring just different women from different industries. So that's something, when I say, like, we want to give back and lend voices, is we believe that we have a community. It may not be the biggest community, but we have a community. And we want to lend our community for other voices to be supported, because we can all learn from each other. You need that diversity of perspective, diversity of thought, for us to all be better.
Hmm. And we'll be sure to include that link to the
Yes,
contest
please.
there. So that's
Yes, sorry,
yeah.
I just dropped that one, didn't I?
No, that's perfectly fine. I think that's it's important, and I know that there's been this movement to really help women entrepreneurs shine, because there is so much value there, and
Yeah.
I think that they do need to be recognized. So it's really important. Even in my digital marketing agency, actually, we've got an even split 50-50 between men and women. So it's really something that I'm that I'm very aware about, and we wouldn't be where we are without the leaders that we have. So, um, but you mentioned, Kathy, that so much has changed in the past decade. You are not the same woman you were back in 2014. So, if you were to give yourself, give your younger self 10 years ago advice, what would that be?
10 years ago, what would that? Recognize that each person has a voice. I think that's what it is. And use it. It's your
Mm,
responsibility and to pay it forward. I think that is really, really important because if we want to build a better world together, um, you need to encourage others to use your voice. I think that's part of this whole diversity and inclusion, right? There's a lot of marginalized voices out there. I don't want to hear the same voice. I want to hear other voices because I'm going to learn from others. So I think that's what, if I was to give myself advice is be confident of your voice and recognize that you have one and cherish it and train your muscle, you know? I think self-confidence
mm,
is a muscle. You have to train it. I hate to say it, fake it till you make it, but there is a little bit of that because the truth is, I think imposter syndrome is so prevalent, but we don't really talk about it.
mm.
I think sometimes I joke and say, people think entrepreneurs are like rock stars, and we're not. Like, it's a lot of hard work, dedication. We eat a lot of shit before we get to even like get anything, right? And let's be honest, like every day is a box of chocolate, and I don't know if I'm gonna get my favorite chocolate or I'm gonna get the chocolate I absolutely hate, but I'm gonna have to eat it.
Yeah, that's part of being an entrepreneur, and I think that's what defines. When you're actually becoming an entrepreneur, you're basically becoming comfortable with failure because you
Mhm.
have to fail. And I mean, failure is just a feedback. It's a step towards success.
And
And what most people see is the end result, and there's a big journey behind that, which has
it's
many failures. So
and I think the journey continues even if like what honestly, like what is success? What does success mean, right? Who's to
yeah.
define what success is? Everyone has a different definition. So, I that's why I go back to valuing your diversity and your uniqueness. And
Mm,
if you really believe in it, then just go for it. But recognize that you
mm.
might get hurt along the way. Resilience is so important. I think
That's
resilience is
true.
really, really important, right? Like you said, you're not going to learn unless you fail.
Hmm. And it's interesting you mentioned about success. I have this opinion that success is never a destination. It's a journey.
Yeah,
It's always
absolutely.
evolving, and when you reach a certain level, you want to be more successful. And whatever you define that success is, whether it's monetary gains, whether it's well-being of your family, or balance, it's a definition that everyone has that is unique to
Yes.
them, and it is but it must be aligned with your core values and
Yes.
what you believe in. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
true.
And that's what I'm going. Everything goes back to really your North Star. What are your core values? And if you think about it, like you said, success, you define success by your North Star, by your core values and what's important to you as an individual. And I think that's how we brand, right? Branding is about
Mm,
matching. It's like dating, right? You got to know what works for you because you share similar values. You you're aligned, and I think when you're
that's
aligned, it's less frictional. And that's really where love and emotions and all of that start. And that's how you connect. Because really, isn't that part of marketing, right? That emotional
that
connection.
is that is true. That is true. Yes. So, Kathy, what has really worked when it comes to your social media strategy? Have you used any techniques or approaches that have actually worked really well for your brand?
Yes, actually. So when we decided to get into social media, the first and foremost thing I did was I wasn't going to assign this, I wasn't going to do it myself. So I felt like it was important that we approached it professionally. I didn't want us to have a digital presence and just, it's someone's job to do when they were free, because that's not really fair. And I feel like, it's a touch point to your brand. So I think consistency is key. So basically, from when we started having social media to even present day, we hired an agency to help us. So the agency helps us craft our voice, our brand, every brand experience. The content is really us. It's just still driven by us. The vision, everything is still us. But how do you refine and really make sure that you're consistent in the touch point that you're having with your audience? Really, we think that's just really, really important. So I think being professional on your social media is important as well. um, you know Looking at content, not just the visual but also the words. I find the words are important as well, because if I'm
Mm.
understanding it correctly, that's where the SEO comes in. All there's this back end stuff that I would say when we first launched in social media, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even
Mm.
understand what it is. And I'm an expert. We're an expert at apparel making. I'm not an expert at digital marketing or understanding SEO. So that's my word of advice to any entrepreneurs out there that's trying to tackle this themselves. If you have the budget, hire professionals. like
That's
like your business, right? Like that's I think you need to get it professionally done. If you want to be treated professionally, I think you need to make the investment to look professional.
Hmm. So, just a follow-up question to that, because I think it's a really important point, is often when you are posting content online, you must be tracking what is working, what isn't working. And is that something that you do in-house, or do you rely on the agency to be able to gather some data for you and present, in terms of the voice, as far as what is working and what isn't?
We have the agency doing it now. In the beginning, it was just me trying to understand Google Analytics and going like, "What is this? What does this mean?" And but now we have the agency who guides us. But I'm a very curious individual, and I love learning. I also love it when my team learns as well. So we do weekly meetings with our agency, and we get updates from our agency as well, seeing what type of content works. Like we find that apparently when there's a picture of me and my kids, there's more engagement. So, but that's authentically us. So, but we didn't plan it that way. So that's where we're looking at some of the engagement points, the clicks, the touches to say, hey, what type of content should we put out there? Um,
Mm.
and it's also an opportunity for us to share what our brand ethos are. So I think the storytelling is extended not just from our website, but from our website to your experience. I always say like marketing really is an emotional experience, right? It's an emotional journey. And if you think about it, what we sell and what we make is premium apparel. And this is something I always talk about where, we celebrate farm to table. We celebrate farmers, right? And we should, because they work really hard in harvesting the food that we ingest and we eat. When was the last time we ever celebrated skin to makers? You wear the
Mm.
clothing, it's so close to you. It's very personal. But when do we ever celebrate the makers, the seamstress who's worked really hard to make sure that seam that's keeping your garment together is nice and like straight, right? And that the construction is good. We don't think about that. So that's one of the things that we've done with our what I was hoping to achieve with our social media is actually highlight that. Not necessarily be a voice just for our makers. If you think about it, I mean, I'm sure there's technology out there, but we're not at the point where it's so fully commercialized. So the way I see it is we're using digital media, we're using digital to showcase a really slow fashion. There's some irony in that, but it helps us educate and let people know why a Redwood Classics sweatshirt we think is so special. It's that emotional connection, and we're using digital platforms to show that.
Kathy, it's been such a pleasure to have you here at the show. Um, if our audience wants to contact you or reach out to you, what is the best platform to reach you at, and where can they contact you online?
They can find me on Twitter. So you can reach me at Redwood Classics. We are on Instagram at Redwood Classics. We are on LinkedIn on at Redwood Classics, and Facebook at Redwood Classics. So we're quite prominent on all of those platforms. Yeah, and then I
Excellent.
myself, you can find me at Kathy with a K, KW Cheng, Cheng, and you'll find me more on IG. That's I
All
just
right.
can't keep up with everything, or LinkedIn, one or the other.
Excellent. We'll definitely include a link to all the social media channels in our podcast here. And yeah, I mean it's a pleasure to have you here today. I think we've learned so much, and I feel that our listeners will really gain in terms of the insight that you've shared today about just keeping it real. And I think that's and keeping it authentic. I think that's really critical, especially in today's market. So. Love your brand. Looking forward to learn more about the brand as well. And I wish you certainly the best as you move forward in your business. And stay in touch.